Today I'll be giving you the rundown on every single Premier League team for career mode. It took me ages to make this video, in fact this year took over 20 hours, so I'd really appreciate you dropping a like and subscribing if you want to see more stuff like this. I wanted to do this video right this year, so now the January transfer window is over, I'm going to look at every single team in the league squad, give some signing suggestions and a challenge for your save, as well as an alternate tactic that you can use if you're not a fan of their current manager. Skip along the bottom if you want to see a specific team, but anyway, let's get straight into it with Arsenal. This year looked like it could have been Arsenal's year. After 2 second place finishes in a row, the Gunners would have been praying for a drop off from Manchester City this season. Annoyingly for them, when that happened to City, Arsenal also fell away, and it looks like it's going to be tough for them to win any competitions this season. It's not the season that Arsenal expected going into it, but that doesn't mean you can't still rescue the season for them on one of the latest start points. Winning the Champions League is still possible, and that would be the one trophy that fans would love to win the most. It has to be a season 1 target, but even with this squad, it's going to be a tough ask. The squad is, as you'd expect, a really good one. It's kind of a meme to suggest Arsenal need to sign a striker, but really they do. If you're using a live start point that happens after January, you won't get a chance to sign one this season, but they've been linked with Sesko, Vlahovic and Cunha over the past few weeks, and any of them are realistic transfers for your save. The rest of the squad is top tier. You have 5 of the best centre backs in the Premier League, you have tons of academy potential in the fringes of the squad too. It's like Arteta has set this Arsenal squad up to dominate in career mode, because only City and Liverpool can compete with this amount of depth and strength. An Arsenal save could become a really good one, but if you add a challenge, I think it would be even better. Why not see if you can go invincible? Of course, only Arsenal have ever done that in England, and honestly I think with Arteta's defensive stability and the attacking flair that Saka, Martinelli and Havertz have, it is possible to do it inside career mode. If you're not such a fan of Arteta's defence-first football, then I would advise you have a look at some of these tactics from my database. First, someone has made Arsene Wenger ball, which is an Arsenal invincible era tactic, or you could even go back to the 80s with this George Graham tactic that was also pretty successful in real life. No matter the manager, Arsenal are a solid choice, and of course, both tactics are linked in the description to this video. In the last 3 Premier League guides that I've made, I've been talking about Aston Villa's mid-table position. Well, not anymore. They, along with Newcastle, are one of the new challengers for the Champions League spot, and what a squad they've put together this year. There's so much pace, strength and technique in this squad that they can play in any way, but who's going to be better than Unai Emery? Well, you could be. Your first choice is when to start the save. You could start in July and have a full season to cement your top 4 ambitions. You could start in November and have John Duran and Ollie Watkins as a partnership up front, or you could start in February where Duran has already left and Asensio, Marlon and Rashford are all now at Aston Villa. For a club at Aston Villa's level, it's hard to suggest where to improve. They have a top 10 goalkeeper, they've got a solid and hard-working defence, they've got a really efficient midfield that can play and defend, and some of the best attackers in the league. If I was pushed to answer, I would go with a new fullback and a world-class attacking midfielder, but they've already tried that with Coutinho, and Rodgers could easily be developed to be better than Coutinho ever was anyway. Rodgers isn't the only one with that kind of potential. In fact, there's so much potential in this team that I think you have to be aiming to win a second Champions League. They won the first back in 1982, but within 5 years, this team will have developed to be elite. You might need a new striker by then as Ollie Watkins starts to age, but you'll have all of the Premier League money to spend, so you can sign almost anyone you want for Villa. By season 5, you might actually be bored of playing with Emery's tactics, so I've also created some tactics that Villa can use. The first is Tony Barton's tactics that he used back against Bayern in the 82 final, the other is Martin O'Neill's overachieving Villa from the mid-2000s. I'm not too sure how these guys would fare in modern football, but as throwbacks, they're 2 of the best. Both tactics again are linked in the description to this video. On the south coast, you'll find the second smallest ground to ever exist in the Premier League. It's smaller than Swindon Towns, it's smaller than Oldham and Blackpool. Bournemouth are actually only beaten by last year's Luton Town Stadium in this regard. But honestly, not much actually does beat Bournemouth anymore. They've transformed into a European threatening team just from their amazing recruitment. When it comes to Spanish managers in the Premier League, lots of people like to talk about Emery and Arteta, but to complete the hat-trick of Spanish managers, Iraola could be the best of the lot. The squad is in a really good position, but only as good as they were in 2019 according to EA. That year they had Wilson and King up front with Ake and Klein at the back, and honestly, I don't think any of those 4 players will actually get into a fully fit Cherries team anymore. I have to stipulate fully fit, because that is not the state that Bournemouth are in. They've lost Evan Nilsson and Unal for a long time, which is replicated in the live start points. If you begin your save at the start of January, you'll have both of these strikers ready to play, but if you pick February instead, you'll be limited to one of the squad's dozen tricky wingers playing up front out of position for you instead. These guys can still do a job, and honestly, the goal should be to try and qualify for Europe in Season 1. If you fancy a challenge, see if you can win the Europa or Conference League in Season 2, while only signing young players under the age of 22. I think this is a really cool challenge because, other than Neto, every player in the squad is under 30, so this has been a really outstanding season from such an inexperienced squad. As your squad matures and develops in your save, you might also fancy switching up the tactic. I did mention 2019 earlier, so our first alternate tactic is Eddie Howe's 4-4-1-1, which recorded a record high finish for the Cherries. I would also suggest another one of Eddie Howe's many tactics here, with his League One champions 4-4-2 being a cool retro throwback to a club without too much success to lean back on. Both tactics are again linked in the description to this video. As the Premier League's resident Moneyball experts, Brentford have put together a team of relative unknowns and probably defied expectations as they start their 4th season in the Premier League. Honestly, it feels like they've been around longer, but Brentford have carried on their data-driven ideology that got a tiny club promoted from League 2 to the Premier League. Because of the lack of reputation in the squad, it does feel like EA has underrated quite a few of their players. However, just like the real team, you're going to be relying on Visser, Schade and Mbermo to provide any goals, while also hoping that a pretty cobbled together back 4 can prevent any chances from going in. A new look defensive line is pretty important on the save early on. It's hard to suggest who Brentford would actually sign here. In real life, they'll probably find a 6'7" monster from the Norwegian 2nd Division, and that's the kind of level you probably should be scouting. Maybe someone like Håkon Voldenwold would be a really good pick. He's young, full of potential, and plays for Rosenborg in the Norwegian league. Nils Zatterstrom, also at Malmo, could be a similar type of signing that would help bolster your back 4. While it's not required to play as Brentford, I do think that Moneyball has to be a central theme for any save with Brentford. In fact, if you want a challenge, why not see if you can qualify for Europe while only signing players under 75 overall? I would say that this is 100% possible to do, and both of the suggestions earlier would have been valid once they developed to be good enough to get into your first team, but in their entire history, Brentford have only signed a handful of players over the rating of 75. 2 of these players are still in the squad, Ben Mee and Mark Flecken, but other than that, most of them actually went on to flop. It is actually quite hard to suggest Moneyball signings because it depends on how you want to play. Of course, you could play like Thomas Frank does now in 2025, but he has had a couple of different tactics since he took over. I've created my favourite, which you can see right here, and if you're not a fan of Thomas Frank, why not try Mark Warburton's League One winning tactic, which was more similar to tiki-taka than Thomas Frank's long ball, and I do think that this current squad has what it takes to bring that ethos back to the Premier League. Brighton are one of the most interesting teams in the Premier League. Not only do they sign relative unknowns from some of the most obscure nations on the earth, but they're also really good at developing them and then going on to sell them for millions. They're not historically the biggest club in the region, but there's no doubt that they're currently the hegemons of the South Coast. As you'd probably expect, Brighton have a super high potential team. Matt O'Reilly and Carlos Baleba could easily develop to become the best midfield pairing in the entire Premier League, and I could keep reeling off names of players in this squad that will become elite in your game. However, despite all of that, the club does still need some rebuilding. The ever-improving squad has taken a bit of a slip recently, so maybe it's time that Veltman, Welbeck were moved on, while Dunk takes a mascot role where he mainly plays on the bench. Thankfully, there are a few decent young centre-backs in the Championship this year, there's even more in the Netherlands and a ton of them in South America, which are the main hunting grounds for Brighton's analytical model. If you'd like a Brighton-themed challenge for your save, why not see if you can develop one player from every single nation in South America to reach 80 overall. Brighton have already got close to doing this with Ecuador, Brazil, Paraguay and Argentina in real life, so why not add a Uruguayan, a Peruvian or a Bolivian to this list and see if you can tick off the entire continent. Brighton have actually done something even more rare, and they've had a South American manager in charge of the club. Gus Poyet had a fairly successful spell as manager in the Championship, so I've added his tactic to my database, while also adding Graham Potter's famous Brighton tactic too. Why not check them out by clicking on the links in the description below this video. With one of the most expensive squads in the entire world, it's not that unexpected that Chelsea have one of the best squads in the game too. It might not seem like that's the case when you start your save, but give it 2 years and you'll be competing with Arsenal, City and Liverpool for the title. The club has at least 2 high potential players in every single position, so it is hard for me to suggest new signings for the save. For example, Robert Sanchez isn't the best goalkeeper, but why sign a new player when you've got Jorgensen and Solina that could both be world class? Chelsea have signed so many players that it's really hard to narrow down where they actually look for new players, but signing players from other Premier League teams that have got potential to be special, or maybe even the exciting prospect tag, seems to be the best choice. Realistically though, Todd Boehly's plan was to spend all at once to build potentially the best squad in the world, so reducing the spending down to 0 and move to developing the players you already have might be the best option for your save. So, Chelsea are proof that with enough money you can buy a high potential team, but what if you're not so keen on that idea? A really fun challenge would be to try and build a full 11 of Chelsea Academy graduates. This would probably be able to challenge for the title too. You'd have a defence with Colwill, Aki, Gahey and Reece James. You'd have Elise and Hudson-Odoi on the wings, with Solanke partnering Nketiah up front. The Chelsea Academy is almost unmatched when it comes to producing fun and also elite players inside career mode. Chelsea have also had some elite managers. Maresca seems good, but Conte, Tuchel and Mourinho all have a bit more prestige. If you prefer to use one of their tactics instead, they're all linked in the description beneath this video. If you're interested in the best fan culture in England, or maybe you just really enjoyed the stadium that Ted Lasso was filmed in, then maybe Crystal Palace is the team for you. Over the years, they've had some of the most enjoyable wingers in the league. Balassi, Zaha, Elise, Eze and even Bakary Sacco. They all love taking on a man, but they were all also plucked from the Championship. That's a key market for Crystal Palace, and one that no one else exploits better than they do. While the wingers were always important for Crystal Palace, the rest of the team is also extremely well balanced. The back 3 are all international centre-backs, with Lacroix's 92 covering sprint speed hard to beat too. In front of them they have Adam Wharton and Jefferson Lerma, who again could realistically play any type of football that you're interested in using. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement. A lot of the team are past their peaks. Hughes, Klein, Ward and Schlupp have all been at the club for a long time, but this is more dangerous than it looks. Because the club knows they can depend on these guys, they have to get their replacements correct or the club could tumble down the league, just like Wolves did a few years ago in a similar situation. I would really recommend looking to the Championship to find their replacements. Chris Rigg could easily replace Will Hughes' playmaking deep. Depending on your starting week, Roman Esse might have already joined from Millwall, and Egan Riley could probably replace either Klein or Ward depending on how you want to develop him. The Championship identity runs through Palace so hard that I'd actually consider using it as part of a challenge. See how far you can get only signing players from the Championship. If you get a good academy player and you want to use them in your save, you could even loan them out for a season there too. There's a lot of talent in the Championship, especially when better clubs get relegated as you go deeper into your career, so it should be possible to eventually win the league using just Championship signings. Of course, as a club that's been at the top 2 levels for so long, Palace do also have a bunch of alternate tactics that you can use. It could be Neil Warnock's attempt at long ball, or it could be trying to redeem Frank de Boer's unsuccessful ideas around possession. I've added both of these to the description below as well, so check those out if you're interested in not playing as Oliver Glasner. Everton are one of the grandest clubs in the Premier League. They're Premier League regulars and one of the few clubs to have experience at both ends of the table, but since 2019, things have really not gone so well for the Toffees. Their position in the Premier League has been at danger, and finally though, things might be starting to look up. Before we talk about them on FC25, here's exactly what I wrote back in my FIFA 21 Premier League guide. I said that there was a downward spiral since a great start in 2020, but there was a lot of pressure on the club. You could attribute a decent amount of this due to an injury crisis, but it was only magnified by an even bigger lack of depth in the squad. So, can you honestly say that anything has changed since 2021? Sean Dyche almost single-handedly kept the club alive for 3 years, and the Premier League money has also attracted some new investment. Now Moyes is back, it's time to spend. No matter what start date you'll pick, this is the same situation. In his first spell back in the mid-2000s, Moyes created a pretty youthful, hard-working side, and now he'll have to do it all over again. Almost every position in the squad needs modernising. You could be nostalgic and re-sign some of their 2017 squad that with hindsight looks to be pretty amazing. It had Lukaku, Stones, Barkley, Barry and Deulofeu, and these are the types of players that you need to find. But I do think signing someone like John Stones or Ademola Lookman, their return could be a fun idea. Everton don't really have this big challenge that we can do inside career mode. Instead, every effort just needs to be spent rebuilding the squad. If you do want a challenge, see if you can rebuild into a top 10 team while spending less than you earn from sales, which should be possible with how high some of the player values are in the Premier League. Of course, with a rebuild, it depends on how you want to play. If Dyche ball or Moyes ball don't quite hit the spot, then why not try and play like Ancelotti did? If you didn't realise, he was the manager of Everton for a few years, and his departure really did mark the beginning of the downfall for the Toffees. There's always the option to play like 2006 Moyes too, so if you prefer to use one of their tactics, they're both linked in the description beneath this video. If there's one club that seems to be going under the radar this year, it's probably Fulham. They finished 10th and 13th in their first 2 years after promotion, but they're looking good for a first top half finish since 2012 this time around. The squad is full of cast-offs from larger London clubs, and together they make one of the best counter-attacking teams in the league. While Fulham did have a reputation for spending big, mainly because of their 2017 promotion, now they have one of the most frugal teams in the league. Players like Robinson were signed from League One Wigan and they've grown to be one of the best left backs in the entire league. They also picked up Iwobi, Raul Jimenez, Smith Rowe and Harry Wilson for below market value, so Fulham are kings of the bargain in this level. However, this does come at a cost. Fulham has an average age of over 28 and there's not much potential to improve without making new signings. If Fulham could pick up a young striker for cheap, similarly to what they did with Mitrovic when he left Newcastle, that could catapult them to a top 6 finish this season. I could see someone like Jorgen Strand Larsen moving to London if Wolves were to be relegated, or someone like Xerxes moving from Manchester United if they spend big on a striker, someone like Gyökeres. Rebuilding the squad is a big part of your first 2 seasons, but you should be able to raise quite a bit of money in the process. If you want a challenge, see if you can bring the average age down below 25, while also qualifying and winning the Europa League. Fulham did make the final about 15 years ago, so that would firmly put the club on the map and put them on the radar. Ipswich Town are back again. They were gone for too long, but now the county of Suffolk finally has a Premier League team once again. Even with their absence though, they're not the lowest rated team in the league, but they are by far the poorest, with a smaller transfer budget available than 3 teams in the Championship. Just like after Forest's promotion in a similar situation, Ipswich have spent big to try to stay up. Annoyingly for career mode fans, this means it is hard to move a lot of the players on if you don't want them, but there is a lot of talent still in the squad. If you're beginning on the post-February live start points, you'll need to fight for every point, but survival should still just about be possible. If you're beginning back in July, then you need to use the 2 windows to make sure you don't go down. The club tried to do what a few others have done following promotion in the past by creating a championship super team. Leif Davis and Sam Morsey were 2 of the standouts in the lower levels, but Smosdic, Greaves and Delap were all championship players of the season at their last clubs. The squad is a far cry from their 2 European trophy winning teams of the 80s, but there's no reason that survival can't mean they also repeat Forest's rise into the top half. The entire club has one focus: avoid relegation at all costs. I'm not sure how possible that is, but I recommend cranking up the difficulty and using competitor mode not only to make yourself better at the game, but also simulate the difficulty that promotion causes championship clubs. Kieran McKenna is inexperienced at this level, so maybe it would be a good idea to use the minds of Bobby Robson or Alf Ramsey, who are the 2 best managers in Ipswich Town's history. If you want to use one of their tactics, again, I've created them and linked them in the description beneath this video. As an outsider, it's strange to think about how Leicester have dropped from trophy winners in 2019 to relegation fodder just 6 years later. However, in 6 years' time, Leicester fans could be envious of the situation they're in right now. With fan protests and an ageing squad, the 5,000-to-1 champions of 2016 look closer to a prolonged spell in the Championship than returning to the Champions League. In fact, only Southampton have a worse squad than last year's Championship champions. 37-year-old Jamie Vardy's no longer really cutting it up front, and Wout Faes might be the worst defender I've ever seen in the Premier League. To make things even worse, the transfer budget isn't even big for this level anymore. The entire club needs a rebuild and a reset. But that's brilliant news for a career mode save. If you start your save before the 29th of November, you'll have Steve Cooper as your manager. You could of course pick a different manager with a better tactical direction, but I'd recommend that you use this date no matter who you want to be your manager. On this date, Leicester are 15th, 4 points above the relegation zone, and you have about 5 games before the transfer window opens to scout new players and make sure that you get those moves correct. A new striker, a goalkeeper and a central defender is the very least that you'll need to buy, but I would go even further and say that most of the club could use an improvement. Once you've stabilised the team, you could maybe try and improve the team by buying back some of the Fox's miracle men. Kante and Mahrez are still going to be better than anyone you've got, and they're both playing in Saudi Arabia, so why not see if you can develop the club fast enough to win a second title with them before they retire. From the state that they're in right now, I think even greater than 5,000 to 1 odds would be offered on Leicester winning the league in the next 5 years. Of course, it's totally up to you which manager you pick. You could try and save the season as Cooper, rebuild as Rude, or go with someone else. Ranieri's return would be interesting, so his tactics, along with Brendan Rodgers' Fox's, are both linked in the description beneath this video. Check them out if you're interested in using either of them. In every live start point from October onwards, Liverpool are basically on the parade to winning the title. The nearest threats for most of the season have been Forest and Arsenal, who are both having their own challenges and realistically aren't going to be rivaling Liverpool this season. If you want an easy title, Liverpool are the team to pick. But also, Season 2 could turn out to be one of the most difficult saves in the entire game. So, 2025 could be massive for Liverpool. Come August, Salah, Virgil and Trent could have all left the club, and Arne Slot will finally have a chance to strengthen the team in his own image. Given that his only signing so far is a struggling Chiesa, Season 2 could be a really awkward one for Liverpool, unless it's properly planned and analysed for the rest of 2025. With about £600,000 of wage budget potentially opening up, I think the idea of not renewing those 3 players is the most fun way to play a Liverpool save. Sure, we all know that it's trivial to extend contracts inside career mode, but being forced to replace the best right back, centre back and right winger in the entire game's database in the same summer is undeniably a really fun situation. Do you go for a player like Rodrigo to try and replace Salah's goals and assist output? Do you replace Trent with another player that inverts? Or do you go more defensive like City and Arsenal have chosen to play? There are so many crossroads in a Liverpool save that by the time you start Season 2, you'll probably have forgotten about the title win in Season 1. I literally can't figure out a way to replace all 3 of them at once in a sensible way, but there are so many options and combinations that it suddenly makes what looks like a really easy save turn into a really challenging one. If you'd like to make your save even harder, why not try and do what the 18 to 19 team was so close to doing by becoming invincible Centurions. That year, the team ended with 1 loss and 97 points, losing the title to Man City in the process. Reaching 100 points without a loss would definitely overtake Arsenal's Invincibles to be the best season any team's ever had in Premier League history, and with the correct rebuild, it's totally possible that you can do this inside career mode. If you want to go for that level of success, you might also be interested in moving away from Arne Slot's tactics. They're looking good this year, but returning to Klopp's 4-3-3, or maybe even King Kenny or Bill Shankly's tactics could be a cool throwback that unexpectedly still somehow works in the year 2025. All of those tactics are linked in the description underneath this video. For the first time in about a decade, Manchester City have had to spend big to get themselves back in contention. After coasting on the splurges made when Pep first became their manager, finally the squad has got too old and needed a refresh. It might sound bad, but this is actually a good thing for anyone interested in using them in career mode. It's actually hard to sum up the position of the squad for City. Really, there are only 2 paths that your save can go. The first is starting in July and see if you're able to fix the squad before things actually go badly. Or you can take over the club at the end of December and rebuild an elite club with about £200 million to spend. The second idea sounds the best to me. The week in between Christmas and the New Year sees City down in 17th, 14 points behind first place Liverpool. You'll also get the first transfer window almost straight away. Copying City's signings might be fun, with Marmoush looking like a really good direct player, but you could also go a different route and prepare a new generation of high potential players to replace the likes of De Bruyne, Bernardo and Gundogan. You'll have a ton of budget and a group of ageing players that are still able to compete, and for the first time in years, playing as Manchester City actually has some level of strategy, skill and difficulty. If you decide on a Manchester City save, maybe you'll want a challenge that is only related to Manchester City. You could simulate some of the potential charges that are being held against them. This could be a transfer embargo for 1 or 2 years, it could be the suspension of some players for a long time in one season, or having to raise a certain amount of money from player sales before they're allowed to buy anyone new. All of these are fun ideas that can easily be done inside career mode and will make the save better. Whether you restart the season or start from after City's bad run has already begun, you might want to change how the team plays. I don't think that many people will not want to be Pep, so maybe you could copy one of his many other styles, or maybe you'll want to go back to Mancini's title winners from 2012. I've linked a bunch of Manchester City tactics in the description below, so check them out if you're interested in changing things up. I've been making videos about rebuilding Manchester United for almost 5 years now, but the club keeps getting things wrong. With a huge stadium, one of the best academies in the world, and also a top 5 worldwide budget, it shouldn't be too hard to get United back to winning ways, but somehow, the cursed club keeps stumbling towards players like Casemiro, Xerxes and Harry Maguire. Honestly, Bruno and Mainu are probably the only 2 players I'd keep in a Manchester United save. Some of their best young players have been sold to try and improve the squad elsewhere, but a midfield of Elanga, McTominay, Bruno, Ugarte and Garnacho would at least work hard and play for the badge, but sadly what United have right now is the exact opposite. If you look back at their squad throughout the past 10 career modes, the one thing that they've always lacked is a proper striker. Cavani and Zlatan Ibrahimovic were the only 2 players that really filled this role properly, so I'd be going out to sign a fairly young elite striker straight away. I think you'll be able to get a decent sum for Xerxes, but push the boat out for someone of the calibre of Osimhen, Vlahovic or maybe even Marcus Thuram. If you want to make things even more realistic, then just wait 2 years and spend £50 million on a Pastit, Son, Kane or Ollie Watkins, just to have to replace them in a year anyway. From experience, I would also recommend upgrading your central midfielders, and keep an eye out for players from markable countries like America, Japan, Korea and China, because they've all been at United in the past. I'm sure that they would love an Indian or an Egyptian playing in their squad just because Manchester United is a marketing machine. The fun thing about these nations is they could all be good nations to scout for your academy, and that should also be a big part of your United save. United actually have a streak going back to 1937 of having an academy player in every single first team squad. Building a fully homegrown squad would be fun, but the real challenge is rebuilding United to win another treble. This season marks 26 years since their first, and with proper rebuilding, it should be possible to do it by the end of this decade. Of course, there are dozens of managers that could inspire your rebuild. Amorim's tactics are of course solid, but Ten Hag's are probably more fun, as are the many variations of Alex Ferguson. I've actually collated all of the Manchester United tactics I have into one collection that you can click on the link and scroll through in the description below. In the first Premier League guide I made way back on FIFA 21, Newcastle were in one of the worst situations imaginable, but now they're arguably in one of the best. They have tons of money, they've got a fresh young team and players like Isak who they could easily sell for £100 million. If their new stadium goes through, then Newcastle will literally be the envy of the entire league. Even with the recent renaissance, they could still improve in career mode. Their right side is weak, and even though it's nowhere near as bad as it was 5 years ago, Murphy should be a good backup, so a new starter is needed. I would also find a replacement for the over-the-hill Trippier. Livramento could be that guy, but he'll take 2 or 3 seasons to get there. If we look at the rest of the squad, it's perfectly suited to FIFA. With Gordon, Isak having tons of pace, Tonali, Bruno and John Linton all being elite ball winners and playmakers, Botman and Shah are able to deal with AI cross spam, and Nick Pope is really huge, which is a massive help at the back. My one criticism is that it would be fun to get some more homegrown Geordies back into the squad. I mean, Elliot Anderson's return does seem inevitable, but using the academy to try and create another Paul Gascoigne would be amazing for the city. Even if you don't use the academy though, I'm sure the city wouldn't care where the player lifting a trophy was from, only that they were wearing the black and white stripes at Newcastle. Compared to some of the challenges that other clubs in this league have, Newcastle's is pretty simple: win a trophy. If you start on any of the start points after February, Newcastle will either be in the Carabao Cup semi-final or actually confirmed in the final itself, which of course is a top opportunity to try and end the 55-year drought. It also gives you a springboard for Season 2, where you could push for the FA Cup, Champions League or Premier League and bring even more success back to the Toon. Despite their reputation for not winning trophies, Newcastle were actually known as the entertainers for most of the 90s. This was mainly thanks to Kevin Keegan's Newcastle's super fluid tactics, with Ginola, Asprilla and Peter Beardsley all given the freedom to express themselves up front. It's interesting to think that if this style could work in 2025, so why not use the share code that I've linked in the description to try it in your next Newcastle save. How could you not be interested in a Nottingham Forest save this year? If I'd made this video in October like usual, I'd have been happy with the start the club I support had made, but now, like every other tricky tree, I'm renewing my passport so hopefully I can watch Forest play in Europe. It's been such an up and down 5 years for Forest. The club missed out on the playoffs at the start of COVID thanks to losing on the last day 5-1, and the season after, Forest looked destined for relegation to League One. 2 years later, Steve Cooper took over and the club never looked back. There have been points deductions, there's been over 100 signings, but also one of the best days of my life with promotion back to the Premier League when I watched Forest play at Wembley. Over the past year, things have started to stabilise on Trent's side. The new signings have stopped, and Nuno looks cemented in his position as manager, and even the never-ending sacking and rehiring of boardroom staff seems to have now ended. But now the club is focused all on one thing: returning to Europe for the first time in nearly 30 years. For a FIFA player who wants to play with a non-elite club, I don't think it gets much better than Forest. The squad is packed with potential, but more importantly pace, thanks to the philosophy of counter-attacking the club has been devoted to since around 2017. You'll know players like Alanga from their days at United, but combined with Hudson-Odoi and Gibbs-White, the Forest front four is one of the most exciting combinations out there. But that doesn't mean it can't be improved. There are a few positions that have ageing players, most notably at striker, but also a few players with borderline no squad depth. This season, Chris Wood has of course been on fire, but he's only going to be declining inside your career mode. If you have access to a transfer window with the live start point you begin with, you'll probably be considering an upgrade in Season 1. Likewise with the wingers, the drop off between Alanga and Jota is noticeable both in real life and inside the game. Alex Bayana was an ambitious target in January, as was Mateus Cunha, but just one of these joining along with a new striker could revamp the squad and allow you to push for the Champions League. If there's one part of the rapid rise that Forest fans feel has been left behind, it is probably the academy. Forest had an amazing record of one academy graduate in every squad since 1941, which is nearly as long as the famous Manchester United sequence. But right now, the record is only being kept alive by Ryan Yates staying injury free, with none of the other academy players looking anywhere close to being Premier League ready. If you fancy a challenge, why not try and get a third star on the Forest badge by winning the Champions League for a third time, but also keeping this run alive at the same time? There are a few academy graduates that you might want to bring back that are playing for other clubs. Carl Darlow could be a good backup goalkeeper, Matty Cash would rival Nico Williams as a right back, and maybe even Sheffield United's Anel Ambenhodzic could be a solid backup centre back after he left the academy in 2017. To win the Champions League, you'll probably need to move away from counter-attack and move towards possession-based football, but Forest really don't have much history with that kind of play. The great Brian Clough once said it was sacrilege if his team had less possession in a home match, but even in the back-to-back Champions League winners, he preferred to play counter-attack rather than keep the ball. I'd suggest having a look at the tactic group that I've made over on FC Tactic Database, which I've also linked in the description below. If you want to try some different Forest-related tactics, no matter what you choose, Forest is one of the best options for a save in the entire game this year. Back in the Premier League, Southampton tried to do things differently this year. Russell Martin won promotion by creating a tactic that needed the club to play out from the back, but his lack of adaptability was their downfall early on this year. At one point, it looked like Russell Martin's Saints were on track to score less points than Derby, but Juric has changed the club enough to hopefully avoid that level of embarrassment. Even though things have gone from awful to slightly less bad, Southampton are still in a dire situation. They have the worst squad in the league, and if you use live start points, they're going to be anchored in last place from September until the end of the season. Even climbing up to 19th place would be an achievement for Southampton. But their squad isn't really that bad when you actually look at it. They have a 6'7" giant striker, Onuachu, who could be amazing if you switch from possession to long ball. Matías Fernandes could easily be playmaking for a top half team, and Aaron Ramsdale is one of the best English keepers alive. A tactical shift and some reinforcements could potentially turn the season around if you do it early enough, but even then, relegation looks almost certain. Because relegation is so likely, I would argue that you should probably use the rest of the season as a glorified pre-season, learning how to play with the squad and seeing where you should improve for season 2. Once you're relegated, try to break the championship points record of 106 points. This means winning 35 out of 46 games with 1 draw. It sounds easy, and if you rebuild perfectly, it might be, but it's a lot harder to do than you might imagine. If you're not a fan of either Juric's tactics or Martin Ball, maybe consider looking to the past at 2 successful Southampton tactics. The first is Gordon Strachan's Saints, who reached the FA Cup final about 20 years ago. Alternatively, why not look at Nigel Adkins' back-to-back promotion tactic that crushed League One and the Championship early in the 2010s. As usual, both are linked below in the description. To be honest, I'm not honestly sure if Spurs are underachieving because of their injury crisis, or if that's just the level that the team is at. On FIFA, it's a total different matter. The team could actually be considered one of the best in the entire league, it's by far the quickest, and also one of the squads with the most potential. If we look deeper at the squad, you can see exactly what I mean here. Centre-back Van der Ven has 95 sprint speed, Brennan Johnson, Timo Werner, Son, Udogie and Spence are all over 85 pace as well. It might actually be fun to try and create a team where every single outfield player has 90 pace, but honestly, by the time FC25 is released, Spurs will probably have done it in real life. Their squad could still use some strengthening, but that's mostly because of their ongoing injury crisis. You start out, you think your goalkeeper looks weak, but then you realise Vicario is back in just a few months. It's the same with left back and Udogie, centre back and Van der Ven, and even striker depth with Richarlison. Once these guys are back, the squad will move from being the 8th best to the 4th best, and with the amount of pace, probably a top 2 squad in the entire league. It's not just pace either, there's so much potential outside of the starting 11. Bergwall can become this team's Christian Eriksen, Archie Gray can literally become world class as any type of defensive midfielder, centre back or right back, and you probably know all about Mikey Moore's Neymar comparisons from James Maddison. All you have to do to unlock one of the best squads in the game is avoid being sacked in Season 1. If you stick with Ange, he said multiple times that he tries to win something in his 2nd season, mate, and it's possible that with any live start point up until the 9th of February you can do exactly that. Winning a trophy in Season 1, then finishing in the top 4 in Season 2 is almost required not to get sacked. It shouldn't be too hard to do that, but pivoting the squad to win either the Champions League or the Premier League before Season 5 will be tough. Ange Ball might not even work at the biggest stage, so if you're interested in other tactics, why not try the Spurs-related Harry Redknapp or Pochettino Champions League finalist tactics that I have linked in the description below. Both are really solid defensively, so basically the exact opposite of the default Ange tactic. Other than a few blips, West Ham are one of the most mid-table Premier League teams around. However, things might finally be changing in East London. The Conference League win and the sale of Declan Rice has given the Hammers a huge amount of cash to spend, and it's looking like it might have been well spent in career mode. West Ham might seem quite far down the table, but they're actually in a comfortable position from relegation this season. After hiring Graham Potter, they're well set up to push on next year and try to go deep in another European competition the year after. In fact, the only clubs with better career mode squads than West Ham this season are the Big Six, Villa and Newcastle. But still, there is room for improvement. Signing a new goalkeeper is crucial as Areola isn't that great and Fabianski is 39 years old. I'm also not convinced that Fulkrug is the answer. Danny Ings is now officially old and Antonio might never play football again, so 2 or 3 strikers are probably also needed. The Hammers probably won't be competing with Arsenal and Manchester United for the likes of Osimhen, Sesko or Harry Kane, but the next level of striker is totally realistic. You can just see a player like Santiago Jimenez, Matteo Retegui or Jonathan David pulling on the claret and blue, and a move like that would probably catapult West Ham back into the top half. I'd go with the latest start date for a West Ham save, no matter whether you start in February or in April. It's all about next season. West Ham fans love to claim the 1996 World Cup win as their own, and honestly, it's fair enough. 3 West Ham players were the members of the team, captain Bobby Moore, and the 2 final goal scorers Geoff Hurst and Martin Peters. But can you bring through another generation of England legends from your academy? It's actually a really fun challenge to become the national team manager alongside West Ham and see how much of the team you can be responsible for. See if you can win West Ham a second World Cup in 2030 or in 2034. Graham Potter is one of the most versatile tacticians in the Premier League, so you should be encouraged to try tactics used by other clubs. I've linked Potter's Chelsea and Brighton tactics in the description, but why not also try the Sam Allardyce or Harry Redknapp West Ham ones that I've also linked. All of them are different, but fun in their own ways. In recent years, form like Wolves had until Christmas would have been a death sentence. Even though the club is lucky with the lack of quality from the promoted sides, the club is clearly in the middle of a rebuild. They have secured Cunha until the end of the year, but unless things rapidly progress by May, he'll be gone, and Wolves will have lost the last of their recent golden era players. If you compare the 2025 Wolves squad with the 2021 team, it's evident what's happened here. Good player after good player has left the club, and they've been replaced by either the cheapest option or nobody at all. Neves, Moutinho, Jota, Gibbs-White and even Rui Patricio were all cashed in on, and now Wolves have to spend some of that money if they want to survive past next season. If you want realism, I'd sell Cunha for as much as possible and add that into your budget. That should give you over £100 million, and I'd suggest finding 5 or 6 starting players across the team to try and rebuild it. Strand Larsen, João Gomez and Ait Nouri should grow into really good players, but you'll need at least 2 wingers, a central midfielder, 2 centre-backs and a goalkeeper if you want to move back into the top half. If you're unsure where to rebuild, Wolves have a reputation for signing a lot of players from Portugal. Back in 1999, Chelsea made history by being the first team with no English players in their starting 11, so why not go one further and see if you can field a team of 11 Portuguese players. It's never been done with any nationality other than English, and you've already got 6 in your team with potential to be Premier League level players. Whether you go fully Portuguese or not, Vitor Pereira's tactics might not be your cup of tea. You might want to keep things Portuguese, in which case you might be interested in reverting to the Nuno Espirito Santos version of Wolves, or you might go back to the late 2000s and be interested in playing as Mick McCarthy. Both these tactics are really interesting when compared to the kind of run-of-the-mill tactics used by the rest of the league, and both of them are also linked in the description for you to use in your next save. So, that is a review of every single team in the Premier League. It's over 42 minutes long. This took me absolutely ages to write and research, and hopefully you've enjoyed listening to me talk for this long. Hopefully you enjoyed at least one of these saves, and let me know in the comments if you want to try any of them out. Of course, check out the rest of the videos on my channel if you're new here, because you might find some other content that you really enjoy. But even if not, thank you for watching this video. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you soon. Cheers and goodbye.